Welcome to Journaling with Nature, the podcast for those who want to turn curiosity into wonder, a pencil sketch into a rabbit hole of discovery, a moment of stillness into a life full of joy. I'm your host, Bethan Burton. Let's open the pages of our nature journals and explore this world together. Hello, this is episode 94. It's good to be back with you. I took last week off from releasing a podcast because I was feeling in need of a little break after the busyness of International Nature Journaling Week and everything that's happened since then. But I'm feeling re-energized and excited to begin again. And this re-energizing effect has been in part a result of my conversation with today's guest, author and nature guide David Lukas. David is someone I've wanted to interview for a while now. I found out about his work through his online collaborations with John Muir Laws and Marley Pfeiffer. I've also been following his YouTube channel, and his approach to using words and playing with words as a way of connecting with nature really intrigued me. So I reached out to him, and after a lot of arranging and rearranging of schedules, we got it together to have a conversation. And wow, the conversation with David kind of scrambled the wiring of my brain. We talked about language and nature and all sorts of topics. I had this weird sensation of wanting to talk about everything all at once, and I ended up rambling a bit and being less articulate than I wanted to be. But luckily it didn't matter because I think David understood my meaning most of the time. There were so many concepts to explore, and after our conversation ended, we both agreed that we could have spoken for hours more about this shared love of language and how it can be used to explore the natural world. Let's listen. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. I'm looking forward to chatting.
Thank you. Did I introduce myself?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm David Lukas. I am a freelance naturalist from the west coast of North America in the Pacific Northwest. And I have been doing natural history my entire life. So I look forward to talking with you today.
That's amazing. And in fact, my first question with all my guests is always about where it started and whether nature journaling in particular, or nature connection and natural history in your case, was part of childhood.
Yes, absolutely. So I have a pretty unusual story, I think, in that I started when I was 5 years old, memorizing pictures and field guides. And I was just kind of like this crazy, self-driven little human that was just like a little engine studying natural history my entire life. I mean, so I started by memorizing all the pictures and field guides. And then when I could read, I memorized all the text. And my dad is a marine biologist, so I grew up around the marine laboratories that he was working in. I don't think I learned anything specifically from that, but I did love playing around the laboratories and all the tanks and all the research and stuff. And so then I was outside all the time when I was a kid, looking at pictures and then trying to find what I found in the pictures and try to understand what I was finding. And by the time I was 8 years old, I had joined scientific societies and was getting scientific journals, and I was modeling my own little field research projects after the testing that you would see in a paper, the discussion, the analysis, the research results, writing my own little research papers. And at that age, I was like, I am going to be a professor of zoology and get a PhD, and that was my life goal. And basically, I grew up in a tiny little fishing village on the coast of Oregon, and no one else like me, no life experience with anyone else like me. And I basically invented the idea of a naturalist from scratch. I had no idea. I just like, this is what I am. This is who I am. And then I discovered Charles Darwin and got an idea that there were other people, that this was something people did. And I was so excited to discover that being a naturalist was a thing, and it fit exactly what I had created in my mind. So that was I just took off like a rocket ship after that and just did. And I've done that my entire life. I still do that. Decades later, still study field guides every single day.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
that inner drive that you had,
Hmm.
and even that there wasn't necessarily like naturalists wandering around your town, that you just knew that inherently.
Yeah, I mean, where does that come from? I have no idea. And I feel very, very fortunate. I mean, basically from the age of 5 on, I've been like a laser beam focused on this, and that's all I've done with my entire life, to the extent of like dropping out of college and never working a real job, to just be in the field every day studying natural history. Just an incredible focus. I mean, you want more of the story,
Yeah,
probably.
tell me the story. Yeah,
Yeah.
so in terms of like going from that wide-eyed
Hmm.
5-year-old
Hmm.
to being a freelance naturalist,
Yeah.
how did your career progress?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was so focused on the academic. I mean, from the earliest realization that that was a way people were, was like
Yeah.
PhDs, academics, professors, really rigorous science. I was like so laser focused on that. I spent my entire childhood and high school years preparing to get in the best colleges, and just being an incredibly astute scientist and knowing the scientific method. And then I got to college and just hated the way they taught
Oh, wow.
biology. Yeah, because I was always this weird mix of really rigorous science and kind of like freelance, free spirit, walking around the
Mhm.
world naturalist, you know. And I got to college and it was just strict laboratory work. And I hated the way that they compartmentalized and divorced you from the natural world in college. And so I dropped out. And then I had
That's
like,
so interesting.
yeah, I dropped out. I just totally, actually, I flunked out and they kicked me out of
Mm.
school. Uh, uh, um, and then I just had a crisis of identity. Like, how can I focus my passion? What can I do? And then I
Yeah.
discovered working on field research projects. So I started traveling around the world working on field research projects, or traveling around the United States working on all these different projects. And then I heard about a professor at Harvard University that was studying orangutans in Borneo. So I hitchhiked across the United States, walked into his office in Boston, and said, "Take me with you to Borneo."
Oh,
and
wow.
and he did. I went there for 13 months, working on a field research project in Borneo, and then from there I went to the Amazon, worked for the Smithsonian, and then I started leading tours, natural history tours in Central America. So I was able to find a way to still stay in nature every day, but intellectually engaged and doing something
Mm-mm.
meaningful. And so that's how I was able to find a calling in terms of staying with natural history. And then when I went to Borneo, I decided that a really important role is being an intermediary between scientists and the public. And
Mm.
I wanted to be a writer to communicate what scientists were studying and learning for the public. So I started becoming a writer, to write about natural history. And it wasn't until like 10 years later that I discovered that there's actually a real role for leading people in groups and teaching people through groups. And I love, sharing the natural world with people in groups. And so I've been leading thousands of outings and classes and workshops. And so a mix of writing and a mix of teaching.
I love that you found a way that you saw that you were striving for this scientific academic life,
Hmm.
and then when you got there, it wasn't what you wanted, it wasn't what you hoped for, and then you've just forged your own path. You've found a way to do what you wanted to do, which was to be close to nature and to find wonder in every day.
Yeah, and the challenge was finding a path to be in nature every day, but I don't want to just wander around in nature and
Mm-mm.
like sing to the flowers and stuff like that. I want to like be really deeply intellectually engaged and reading scientific literature and like telling stories and figuring everything out. And so that was a hard path to figure out. So.
You mentioned science, and you also mentioned being a naturalist, and I wonder if what's the difference between a scientist and a naturalist in your mind?
Well, being a scientist is a really rigorous professional path.
Mm.
You have to, everything's peer reviewed, everything's
Mhm.
really rigorous. There's this process, and it has to be accepted by your community. A naturalist is just like free form, like you're just
Mm.
in. engaged in nature and like just, experiencing things and sharing things, personal
Mm.
experiences, emotions, feelings, colors, textures. You can't do that in science. So I just didn't like that rigid mindset.
Yeah, and I guess as scientists, especially when you get to the PhD level, you're specializing, you're going into one tiny area, whereas
Hmm.
a naturalist is someone who can roam.
Yes, yes, I love that. I love the ability to just, yeah. So I mean, I'll study water systems and geology and weather patterns and the little insects and what they're eating and the bacteria inside of their stomach, and I'm telling all of that in one story in one moment with a
Yeah,
group of people. That's being a
yeah.
naturalist. It's like just
Mm-mm.
alive in the wonder together, So
Yes, alive
yeah.
in the wonder together. That's it.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
And yeah, I mean, I love the process of sharing. I mean, we're all trying to figure out what it means to be alive together at this
Yeah,
time in our history. Every generation, every moment in history, everyone together has to figure out what it means to be alive and deal with the challenges of your time. And we're all helping each other learn together. And I really believe in that. And so when I get out with a group on a nature outing, or in a class or anything, I'm like, like, what do we all see? What do you see? What do you see? What's your experience? What can you bring? Let's just riff together and figure this out. I'm not coming in as someone who has the answers. Let's just explore
yeah,
and look at the evidence that we can all see together and wonder together.
yeah. It's alive. That's
Hmm.
amazing.
Yeah.
So I love also to hear about my guests' place in the world. So the
Mhm.
environment where you live and what you see when you step outside. I'd love for you to describe what your place is like.
I'm a newcomer in northern Washington on the Canadian border, and pretty much kind of the end of the road, except in summer when the snow melts in the mountains. You can get over the mountains. So I'm on the big mountain chain in the western United States is the Cascade Mountains. It runs all the way down into the Sierra Nevada, down into Mexico, and up into Alaska. It's this massive mountain chain that runs the full length of the West Coast. And I'm just over the crest on the east side, so we're kind of in the rain shadow. The west side gets hundreds of inches of rain a year, and so then the clouds stop at the crest, and then they break up to the east, and so we're kind of more of a desert area. And where I'm at, we are surrounded by 2.75 million acres of wilderness, a
Wow.
little tiny village surrounded by vast wilderness with like hardly any trails or anything. It's an incredible wilderness. We have grizzly bears, we have wolves, we have wolverines, lynx, just incredible wilderness here. Moose. So
So you don't have to go far to find wildness.
no, I don't. Many trails and many areas where there are no trails. That it's just absolutely crazy wild.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So you talked about being a writer, and I'd
Hmm.
love to go into that because it's something that is quite
Yeah.
it attracted me to your work.
Hmm.
And you've written a book called Language Making Nature, which you describe as a handbook and thinking manual for the craft of creating new words. And I love this idea. It's completely intriguing. I'd love to talk more about this book.
Hmm. Yeah, and I also get a lot of questions and curious comments from people like, "How do you go from being a naturalist to writing a book about language?" And for me, it seems like a seamless transition. So one
Mm,
thing is, I grew up as a kid being really intrigued by the mystery of scientific names and knowing that you could take words apart into their Greek and Latin roots, and there's a story there. And so I was always really intrigued by that idea that you could take words apart. And then at the same time, as I spent so much deep time in nature and in the natural world, I just always felt like there were so many experiences and so many memories and so many things, so many connections that there's no words for. And
mm,
so I just wanted to like combine those two things and use the fact that you can make words out of the pieces of other languages to name things that you're experiencing. So I think it's really important for us as naturalists who are trying to communicate really unique values and experiences in nature and emotions that you experience in nature we were trying to communicate those to people and share those with people, and there's a great opportunity there to name those things. So, and as I worked on the book, what I realized, the sort of the premise of the book is that whoever comes up with the names shape the dialogue of your time. And
Mm.
right now it's corporations giving us names like, Apple computer, iPad, I mean, corporations are always giving us clever names for the newest gizmo that we have to buy. And that's basically what we talk about and think about. And so the question I had is, well, why don't we name the values that matter to us
Mm.
as a people? So
That's powerful.
if we don't name those values, no one's going to talk about them. They're not going to get passed on. They're not going to become part of the conversation. So we have to begin naming the things that matter to us. And I've always thought, like, well, why aren't naturalists creating their own words? We're out in nature doing all these incredible things. Why don't we create words to name these amazing colors and textures and forms and experiences and memories and emotions that we're having in nature? Let's just invent our own words for them and make them part of the conversation.
Absolutely. That's a really powerful statement that
Hmm.
whoever's making up the new words is controlling the dialogue, the
Hmm.
conversation.
Yeah.
And and yeah, I mean, language is such a living, evolving thing that if a language, if a word isn't used, it disappears.
Yeah.
And that idea that we can create, yeah, you've said so many things in that
Hmm.
one
Yeah.
passage,
Yeah.
that scientific names actually do tell a story, and they are
Hmm.
invented, and when you pick them apart with their Latin roots, yeah, sometimes there's a lot of humor in there, and
Sure.
there's a
Yeah.
lot of interest, and yeah, that
That's a
you've
great
said so
point.
many things. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, oh yeah, go ahead. That's a really great
No.
point you're making. I just like my brain's going a million places right now,
Yeah, me too. I don't really know what to
but
focus on because there's so many things there. But,
yeah.
yeah,
So what I was going to
that
say is that, sorry, what I was
no,
going
go
to say
ahead.
is, it's one thing to just make up words, but what's going to really make them stand out is if you use them in the telling of a great story. That's
Yes.
what's going to make them live in your culture. You can't just sit around making up words and putting them together and then throwing them out there and putting them on a
Mm-mm.
website or an internet or something like that. No one's going to do anything with a bunch of words. You have to use them to express meanings and emotions and feelings and concerns that people really have, and then use it in the telling of a story. Then it does the work for you. It just gets used by everyone. So,
Yeah, I actually wanted to talk to you about this because I'm absolutely intrigued by this idea of storytelling, the
hmm,
power of storytelling.
mm-hmm,
Um, I I I think that storytelling is inside of every human being because it's part of human history. It's something that, we evolved telling and listening to stories, and that was part of our survival.
mm-hmm,
We
mm-hmm,
learned about what's
yeah,
safe, what's not safe, where to
yeah,
go, where not to go.
mm-hmm,
Um, so storytelling is innate in
mm-hmm,
humans, and
mm-hmm,
maybe have lost some of that knack, or some of us have lost
mm-hmm,
the knack. But it's such a powerful and important part of human
yeah,
history, and
yeah.
I wonder about that. What storytelling in nature means to you, and how that has played out in
Mm-hmm.
your life.
Yeah, I think it's really important as a naturalist, and I think it's what people really like about going on a nature walk.
Mm.
Uh, so you can just lead a walk and or be a naturalist and point out the names of things. You can name each species you see, um, and no one's going to remember that. That's
Mm.
not that they don't have the capacity to remember a bunch of new names, and so you're not going to really impact people. So what really matters is if you can weave together a story that explains or opens up the world to people in a way they've never looked at the world before,
Mm.
then that's what they're going to remember. That's what's going to open up their hearts. That's what's going to help them understand what they see every day. And that's a story. I mean, the material for that story comes from either all of your experiences in nature, what you see and observe or find out from other people, alongside what you can read in scientific literature. But a lot of that stuff is kind of dry and disjointed. You have to weave that together in some way. So that's the story. That's the making of the story. And what I always do for my walks is that I study and study and study and study just insane amounts, have tons of information, forget all of it, put the books away, and just go out on a walk and
Yeah.
just improvise in the moment, you know, and just let things flow out of the space that I don't even know where it comes from anymore. And then it's also, people ask questions, people make comments, and it's like we're all participating together in this dialogue that just shapes and molds and changes. And it's really exciting because everyone can see that we're all participating in the making of a story together. It's not me standing up as a
Yeah.
leader and telling a story. I'm creating a space where everyone is telling and making the story together as our conversation just unfolds with wonder. Like, look at that color, look at that leaf, look
Yeah.
at that insect. And we're making up the story as we go. What is that doing? What's happening here? Oh, this is interesting. What does it remind you of? And the story evolves out of our shared experience. And that just makes my heart go warm. I just love that experience with people.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting what you said before about being the link between scientific knowledge
Mm,
and maybe a layperson. And it
hmm
reminded me of my own university experience
hmm,
where you might be in a lecture and someone knows so much and yet they can't take it out of their
hmm
own brain and put it
hmm.
into yours. But it was the ones who were storytellers. It was the lecturers
Mm.
who were storytellers who we rushed to go to their lectures because we learned so much.
Oh,
And,
that's great.
and I think it's the storytelling element that
Yeah.
is that passage between
Yep.
science and lay people.
Absolutely. And, I want to honor the work that scientists do, just
Oh
because
yeah.
their focus is so intense and they ask really important questions and get incredible insights.
Yeah.
So the magic of a creator, an artist, is to lift those pieces out of that matrix and bring them to life with other layers of that people
Yeah.
can really connect with. The scientist is often struggles to like connect with what people's emotions and life experiences are, but creators can do that. Artists can do that. So
Mm-hmm.
I love that
Yeah,
role.
I think that all these pieces are important.
Hmm
All the pieces of the puzzle,
hmm
collecting the knowledge, sharing the knowledge, receiving it.
Yeah.
Each person's role. I mean, science is an amazing tool for that and
hmm
incredibly important.
Yeah.
And communicating that is important as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's the work of tens of thousands, uncountable numbers of people dedicating their life to
Yeah.
studying one species or one ecosystem or one
Yeah.
topic. They have incredible rich experiences. It's just a matter of trying to tease it out and bring it to life.
Yeah, yeah,
Hmm
absolutely. And I wonder about this idea of new words and words to help us communicate about difficult things. And I'm thinking about, we're experiencing new challenges ecologically with climate
hmm
change, peak oil, this sort of thing, dramatic
hmm
species loss. And I wonder
hmm
about your thoughts on new words and how they can help us communicate about new challenges.
Yeah. Uh, that's what they do. That's absolutely
Mm,
right. So, I mean, there's so many new ideas happening right now and new realizations that humans have probably never had before because of the scale of the change. So we need some really good words to capture that. So, I mean, people
mm.
come up with Anthropocene, like this is a new
Yes.
geologic time. That's a really useful concept.
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, the words are part of ecological literacy. So any way we can find to communicate to people what's going on in the natural world is going to be meaningful.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this word Anthropocene. It's very
Hmm
it sums it up, doesn't it?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's what new words can do. They can encapsulate ideas really
hmm
poetically.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And there's no right answer. I mean, everyone you create whatever words you want, but you don't get to decide whether it gets used by your culture. I mean,
Yes,
I,
this
I think of it
yeah.
as like you're just an artist and you're like throwing all these beautiful things out there, and what gets used is up to culture and time. You don't get to decide that, but your job is to create juicy material that might get used.
Yeah, juicy material is it. Yeah, and I love this idea. You've talked about community, you've talked about the dialogue, and that's
hmm
what I mean, language is so fluid.
hmm
Language, words come in, they get molded,
Yeah.
they get left behind, or they get changed, or we hold on to them. But yeah, it's like a flowing river almost. You don't,
Yep.
it can shape a stone, but you don't get to
Hmm.
decide in what way.
That's true. And the hard part is we're all brought up in school with the thinking that there's only one way to spell, there's only one way to use words grammatically correct. And those are good things. It makes everything more efficient and we're able to communicate ideas more efficiently, but that's not always the case. I mean, there's a place for wild creativity with language, and
Yeah.
people forget that. They get caught up in the side of efficiency. Um, but that's what keeps languages alive is the wild creativity.
This makes me so happy. Wild creativity in language. This is the best. Yeah, and I mean, I'm thinking this conversation is just, I've got so many ideas and I don't know where to focus. But I love language. I've been studying French for a long time, and
Hmm.
I'm fascinated by um, how different languages have different focuses. I found that French has many, many extra
Hmm.
verbs
Hmm.
that English doesn't
Hmm.
have,
Hmm.
and English has things to describe
Hmm.
concepts that French doesn't have. And I'm fascinated about this idea that a
Yeah.
language can be rich in verbs, or it can be
Yeah.
rich in other things. For example, there's a word in English which is called safe,
Hmm.
where I'm safe, and I use this word often to describe emotionally safe. And
Hmm.
yet in French, you can say en sécurité, which is like I'm physically safe, but there's
Hmm.
nothing really equivalent, like
Hmm. Hmm.
of a safety, emotional
Hmm.
safety.
Hmm.
Um, I just find the whole concept of language and the fluidity of language, and how French is adopting English and English is adopting French. And I mean, they English grew out of French, but um, yeah, I don't know what I'm saying.
Well, we all have the lenses of our time and what we're brought up with. But the point you're making is really important. Is that there's other ways that language can work, and
Mm,
English. I mean, it's true
mm,
for some other languages. English is very noun driven. We're all about
mm,
objects and endpoints and pieces that you can count and control and manipulate.
mm,
And other languages, the classic example is Native American languages are just verbs. They're very verb
mm,
rich because
mm,
you are being, you're
mm.
existing. You're not a thing. You're the act of being that thing.
Yeah,
And it totally changes how you think about relationships and ethics and places. And
yeah.
it's important to stay in that mindset. So, for instance, I mean, like a section of my book, Language Making Nature, talks about punctuation and spaces
Mm,
between words. We take those things for granted.
mhm,
Yet that was invented by the church, the Christian church, as a way to control people's thinking. And that didn't exist before. They invented the idea of putting spaces between words, and every word had to have the spaces in the right place, and punctuation had to shape sentences in a certain way. That was simply a way to control people and their thinking. Um, and so it's an invention, it's an artifact. It's not the way language has to work. You can take punctuation out, you can take spaces out. And a matter of fact, for 2,000 years, languages were written without any spaces between words, and people had no problem reading words and stuff.
wow.
And children until the age of 5 have no problem reading a page with all the spaces taken out between words. They have to be taught to insert the spaces. It's an
Mhm.
artifact, and people don't realize that. They think that that's the only way to use language. And there's several incredible books on this topic. It completely changes the way your cognitive framework works in your mind when you take spaces out between words. It absolutely
Mm,
fundamentally changes how the mind works and engages with the world. And that's an important thing to realize and play with. But those are the kinds of things I like. Like,
yeah.
why not take spaces out of words and play with what that does and learn?
Yeah, or you've reminded me of the poet E. Cummings, who
Hmm.
never used capitalization or punctuation. And when reading E. Cummings' poetry, there is something important
Hmm.
in the lack of those things, because it wouldn't
Yep.
be the same poem with punctuation.
Yeah. Yeah. And all of these things are not far from being in nature for me. I mean,
Yeah.
like I have the same feelings, and my mind is doing the same things when I'm thinking about language and words in this way as when
Mm,
I'm outside watching birds and and trying to identify flowers, my mind is in that same space. I think there's some connection here that I'm still trying to figure out how and what that is. But to me, they're kind of this just different facets of the same puzzle that we're trying to figure out here.
Yeah, interesting. And you've mentioned a few times the word play, and
Mm-hmm.
I wonder what play means to you.
I think it's probably my rebellion against all of the rules and obediences we have to have growing up. I mean, that's probably one reason I've never had a real job, not able to work in teams, and it didn't go to school and stuff like that because I don't like being held in place. I just want to go out in the world and experience and and not have rules.
Yeah,
So it's my
yeah.
rebellion. That's what play means to me, I think.
When you're playing with words, say out in nature, and using these different methods to create new words, what do you do with the words afterwards, or is it the process that's important? Do those words that you create then find their way into your lexicon, or do you into your vocabulary, or is the process what's important, and it's ephemeral, and they're gone because it was that moment that was important?
Hmm. um, well, I'm pretty much the worst practitioner of my own teachings. So I'm all about like coming up with the process and teaching people about it, but that doesn't mean I
Yeah,
use it myself.
yeah.
Like nature journaling even or something like that. I could teach a class on nature journaling, but it doesn't mean I do it myself. So I'm such a teacher. I love figuring out how to explain things and teach things and give people good ideas that they can take those tools and run with them. But that doesn't mean that I'm a creator who runs and plays with these my own tools even.
Mhm, mhm,
But I'll play with. I don't I have written a lot of books, but I haven't written a book for a while. So, and I'm working with video now, so I don't really have
mhm,
a place to put new words.
mm,
Like I'm not writing things and putting things out for people to see and think about, like I have spent my whole life doing.
mm,
So in my field notebook, I'll play with. I like playing with word fragments,
mhm,
and I'll play with pieces of words or just a couple letters out of a word, and I'll put it together with a couple other fragments from another word, and just push them together, and use that as my note taking system. So that's how I
yeah.
do it. Yeah.
I was reading one of the posts on your blog, and it had this sort of breakdown, a series of wordplay and different words coming
Hmm.
together, and it just
Hmm.
made me smile so much because it almost was like tumbling down the rapids of a river or something. It just felt like an experience, just
Oh,
going with you from the start to finish of that wordplay.
yeah. That's great. Yeah.
And in itself, that is, um, yeah, like I said before, like it can be that tumbling down the rapids experience that is
Yeah.
what it's all about,
Yeah.
not necessarily coming up with a unique word that's then going to
Yeah.
be in the dictionary,
Yeah.
just the fun and the joy and the play of that.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we should do. We should just do that play and experimentation. And if out of our lifetime one new word enters the lexicon because of that play,
Mm,
that's great. But if not, we've had
mhm.
fun playing with the material that we love.
Yeah, and not only that, I mean, you learn more about nature by playing with these words because, like you said, you're looking at roots, you're looking at
Hmm.
prefixes and suffixes, and what's that all about, and what are the Latin roots and stuff like that, so you're learning as you're playing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And your book is modeled on the idea of a nature walk. Can you
Hmm.
talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I put that in an introduction that I modeled it on the idea of a nature walk. So I spent my whole life leading nature walks, which means I don't have a preordained order. I don't have chapters. It's just like we're walking together through a landscape, and whatever pops up, we talk about and observe, and then web from that to the next topic and to the next topic. And so I just modeled the book on that. Like there is an index because I was asked to put an index in, but I didn't want to put an index. I didn't want chapter contents. I didn't want an index. I wanted people to just dive in and start reading it, or to open it to any random page and read the section without being connected to another section. So that's how it's modeled on a nature walk.
Mm,
It's also
mm,
modeled. So the book consists of, I forget how many sections are in it, 150 sections or something. That's a guess. Um, and each section is kind of a standalone. It kind of fits around it, but each section, when I wrote it, I would work on that section, write it, and then I would go out on long walks in nature and kind of
mm.
mull over the ideas and see if they resonated and came alive for me when I was in nature. So I kind of tested each section against a nature walk in remote wilderness areas. I'd be hiking and thinking about that and kind of holding that text up to the world. Does this mean anything to me out here where I really care, or does
Oh,
it not
yeah.
work? And then that was the ultimate test for each section of the book, was carry that idea with me on long walks in nature. So that's how it's also modeled on that.
That's beautiful. And something, we're talking about words and words in different places. And um, the word that they use in Britain, instead of hiking, they usually call it a ramble.
Mm-hmm.
And I love this idea of a ramble because it suggests to me like sort of a desultory going from place to place without any
Yeah.
strict
Mm-hmm.
plan. And that's what's coming to mind when you talk about that, not necessarily wanting or needing an index, that it's just a bit of a
Mm-hmm.
ramble
Mm-hmm.
through thoughts about nature.
Yeah. And I wanted to get away from that whole framework of books. So we expect books to have, I don't know, a narrative, table of contents, index, like there's a framework that we can go into and it holds our mind as we go through it. And for me, that feels too constraining. That's not how we
Mm,
engage with nature. And I feel like
mm,
the process of dealing with nature, or language in nature, should be as wild and ruly and
yes.
untended as nature is. So
Yeah, I
I was
love
trying to
that.
duplicate that experience with words.
Yeah, and I feel the same way about my nature journal. I love to use pictures. Pictures is my first sort of go-to when I'm nature journaling or
Mm-hmm.
connecting creatively with nature. Um, but I love to have just a rambling shambles. I'm not like structuring my page or making
Mm-hmm.
it
Exactly.
perfect. It's just
Exactly.
like an ecosystem, like it's all there,
Mm-hmm.
all intermingling on the page.
Yeah. Henry David Thoreau used the word sauntering, which is another good word.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a good one.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. I love the
The idea.
use the word juicy, but yeah, there's these words that we don't use every day,
Right.
but they bring so much richness, don't they?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Uh,
Tell me about nature writers that have inspired and influenced you.
well, it's funny you was asked, because I was just thinking about that, about rich words we don't use very often. Uh,
Mm,
and a writer that I really like a lot is Barry Lopez, who just passed away recently. And his books are so rich and so dense and so beautifully written. And it's the kind of writer that you almost need a dictionary with you to look up words, because he's
mm.
not using like really complex technical words. He's just using amazing old words that have kind of been left behind and lost.
Yeah.
Um, and then Henry David Thoreau is also a huge influence on me. If you've read
Mm.
any of his work, what he was doing is like no one else has ever done. So it's incredible to read his work, including his journals. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another good writer is Robert McFarlane. If you know his
Oh my
work, yeah,
goodness.
yeah,
I love Robert McFarlane, and I find his work um, transports me to
yeah.
wherever he is. He's just got this ability to drop you in. He's got
Mm-hmm.
one book that's all about the mountains,
Mm-hmm.
and when you read that, it's just like
That's
you
great.
feel it,
Yeah,
you feel it, you feel it.
yeah, yeah.
Mm-mm.
And
And he, go on.
oh, well, I was going to say, he and I are kind of working on the same project. So it seems like he's more interested in bringing old words
Old words.
forward in time. And I'm kind of
Mm,
coming at it from like, let's create old word, or create new words from the pieces of
mm.
old words. But it's the same idea. Like, let's, let's like name the natural world with this beautiful language that's possible. So it's kind of
Yeah,
like
yeah.
color. Like, the vast majority of people have so few words to use for color, whereas color is the most amazing thing in our world, and we don't have any rich language around it, except unless you're a specialist. But even then, the words don't really mean a lot to in daily conversation or emotions. I mean, think about
Yeah.
being able to express emotions with words. I mean, people can go, well, there's sad and happy and
Mm, mm.
angry, and then they run out of words, whereas emotions are incredibly rich and varied, and we don't really have a language for that. So, yeah, I mean, there's so many things that we could be just diving in and naming in our world around us to bring richness to all of our lives.
Yeah, I love that idea that you enrich your experience
Hmm.
by naming. And
Yeah,
you can see that I am crazy about color, and I love that idea of naming things, not
yeah.
just that's not just blue, but it's
Hmm.
this blue that means something to you, and you
Hmm.
you create meaning
Hmm.
by naming that. Do you
Yeah.
name think colors around you often?
I think about it a lot, but I don't
Yeah.
have a lot of words to draw on. I mean,
Mm.
like, there's a classical book for museum workers that names all the colors from the 1900s. It's a beautiful old book where the guy hand painted every color swath, and there's like
Yes, I have this.
hundreds of names. But what are you going to do with that? Like, he has like 5 pages of green colors, but
Yeah, yeah.
and it's amazing to give all these different green colors names, but what are you going to do with
Mm,
that then? Who are you going to talk to about that?
mm, mm. And
Amethyst.
maybe it's again, yeah, maybe it's a personal growth experience because for him, I'm sure, like, because he had names for, I think he sort of categorized it like animal, vegetable, mineral for each of the colors. Like,
Mm,
can you find um, shell shell white or whatever it was, um, i animal, vegetable, mineral, and
yep.
I mean, think of the depth of experience and nature connection that that person would have had in just the exercise of creating that. So maybe it's about every person doing that for their own environment, for their own experience.
Well, I think what's important is having fun with
Yeah.
with
Yes, not making
you
it
know yeah, not
a
trying to turn
task
it
to
into
do.
something, yeah,
Mm,
or like you're trying to make money from it, or
mm-mm,
change the world with it. If you love color, spend your life
mm,
being in color and studying color and naming color, and
mm.
it doesn't matter whether you're ever able to do anything with it. Maybe you will, but you don't have to go into it thinking
Yeah,
I'm going to do something significant with this or
yeah,
change the world with this. Just play and have fun and do it because that's your passion and you love it.
yeah.
And as a writer, there's not a lot I can do with complex color names, but as an
Mm,
artist, maybe that
mm.
sensibility and knowing 500 shades of green would help me be a better artist. I don't know, I'm not an artist, but as a writer, there's not a lot I can do with 500 names of green. Like, what am I going to do with that? I can't explain it on a page. Like, well, this one's slightly bluer than, and I've lost the whole spirit of the story I'm trying to tell. So, yeah.
Yeah, but if it describes, like, if it brings you back to a moment, say you
Yeah.
saw this particular bird with a blue breast on
Hmm.
that particular nature walk and that means something to you, then that's again
That's
like
true.
it's it's the putting it down on paper. That's the
Hmm.
power of nature journaling and nature
Yeah.
writing. That
Yeah.
putting it down on paper cements it inside you, doesn't it?
Yes. Yes, it does. Yeah. And yeah, the because it's the moment of engagement and staying
Yeah.
with it longer, like continuing the inquiry into the moment,
Yeah.
not just like jotting something down and then moving quickly to the next thing, but the moment of inquiring and asking and coming up with more questions or more ways to
Mm,
express it keeps you there long enough that it enters your long-term memory. And that's just a beautiful idea. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Tell me about the importance of your notebook because I heard you speak about this this experience in Borneo and how
Mhm.
you realize the power of a notebook. And I wonder about that.
Yeah. Wow. I wonder where you heard me say that, but that's very true. So, the experience in Borneo was really important because my job for 13 months was to go out every day before the sun came up and hike. We were extraordinarily remote in areas that no
Mhm.
humans had ever been in before. And our job was to hike through the jungle, the rainforest for 10, 12 hours a day, and I wouldn't see people until dinner time every day for 13 months, and write down everything we saw. And so that was my job for 13 months, was just
Mm.
take notes on what we observed. And I got so used, I'd never done this in my life, but I got used to the practice of having a pocket notebook, pulling it out and writing down any little fragment of idea, a couple words that came to my mind, a fragment of a memory, a fragment of an observation. If you like, oh, I'm going to remember that. And then 30 seconds later, you're seeing something else and you've completely forgotten that. So just
Yeah.
the habit of fluidly pulling out the notebook and writing down every little thing, no matter how trivial, that crossed my mind that seemed significant at the moment it was occurring. And that
Mm.
became a lifelong practice. So I ended up with, I don't know, 150, 200 notebooks, pocket notebooks now. I never have used them, which is amazing, but I love the process of carrying that and jotting down any little fragment that crosses my mind and just writing it down, just acknowledging it and capturing it. And maybe it does become something at some point in some other way that I don't know. But yeah.
Yeah, and again, maybe just the process does it
Hmm.
changes your mental flow or pushes you in a direction that you might not have gone if you hadn't written it down.
Probably. And it's also, for me, it's a kind of honoring. So,
Yeah.
like, for many, many years of my life, I would carry the pocket notebooks and I would write down every species I saw.
Mm.
Or if I didn't know it, I would make notes so I could look it up later. And my notebooks
Mm.
are just like lists of, 100, 200 things that I saw in every bird, every flower, every insect. I'd write down its name in my notebook.
Mm.
Why? I have no idea. What am I going to do with a list later? There's no other notes, there's no observations. It was just an honoring of the names and
Mm.
staying in
Mm.
that flow of practicing the names. And
Yeah.
have spent my whole life struggling with the process of naming, because I feel like naming is a kind of constraint. It limits your thinking. As soon as you give something a name, you stop engaging with it. And so I always felt like I always struggled with that. That I was right. My my attention to something was writing down its name, and then my mind was
Mm.
always in this. My brain, I'm walking, is just naming thing, name,
Mm.
name,
Mm.
name as I walk, and I'm not like in the moment or anything like that. And so I struggled with that my whole life. And then what happened, which I think is incredible, like at some point I knew all the names so well that I stopped naming, and my mind shut off. And now I can walk for hours in nature and I don't have a single thought. Or
Mm.
if I have a thought, I just let it go. I just like am in absolute total peace, but I still know everything. Everything I see, I know it, but my mind doesn't go to naming. I don't have to go to observing. I just am just in the moment walking in nature. And I feel like that's like an epiphany. It's an amazing experience. It's hard to even communicate what it feels like to just walk for hours with my mind completely at peace and just absorbing everything, just letting everything flow through me. But I don't have to grab it, give it a name,
Yeah.
give it an observation, give it a number. I just let things flow through me and just flow and just stay continuously in the moment of just opening up everything and letting it come through. And that has been life changing. It's an incredible experience. So that I focus
That's
on that.
powerful.
It keeps me from like being a creator that I might want to be. Like I don't get to write, I don't get to keep a nature journal, I don't spend time sketching and stuff like that. I just like go out, and I love doing these long flowing
Mm.
days where I'm just in nature and just highly, highly attuned to every sound, every smell, every color, everything, and just letting it flow through me and being fully open to the moment. And it's a weird way of being and a weird way of expressing myself, but I love that. It's like the highest pinnacle I could imagine reaching.
Yes, and I 100% understand that. And I think some of the most powerful moving experiences in our lifetime
Mm.
are when we're in that state in
Hmm.
nature.
Hmm. Yeah. Yep. That's probably why people like nature.
Yeah, absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, we are nature and we forget that so
Hmm.
easily, but
Hmm.
what you've described is, like you said, it's the highest. It's
Yeah.
what brings us to the
Hmm.
moment,
Hmm.
what brings us peace.
Hmm.
I'm so interested, and sometimes I ask my guests about the head and the heart of their nature journal experiences. And what you've described, you've used some words, you've talked about opening people's hearts, you've talked
Hmm.
about emotion, You've
Hmm.
talked about presence. And I'm wondering about that for you, about your experiences with the heart and with the mind, and how you divide those two things, or if you do, and what that means to you.
I don't. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know how to answer that. I think it's
Mm,
just I just am in the flow of it all, and I don't.
mm,
I'm not there. Uh, yeah, I think I'm just trying to be in both. And
mm,
so, like, I'm just trying to think about like when I lead a walk, because that's when I'm engaging with people, and that's when my heart is coming out because I'm connecting with
mm,
other humans and I'm
mm,
sharing and I'm opening up the world. I want them to come away from a walk having the most incredible experience of their life, like
mm,
from a single walk, change forever how they see the world and
mm,
nature. So I'm fully in heart with other people, but at the same time, I'm like telling incredibly complex scientific stories and weaving together something. So it's it's just the same thing. I'm like giving people with all of my heart this
mm,
amazing, rich information. Like, let's take this knowledge and go as far as we can together as a group with it. What can we all learn together with our shared, hard experience, like whether it's
yeah,
a personal experience or something you've read or something you've always wondered about. Let's pursue it together and see where it goes. So I think it's kind of the same thing. I don't. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I can see that when you're alone in nature, you're experiencing something incredibly powerful, and you want to be able to take that and give it to someone else in
Hmm.
your walks.
Hmm.
You
Yeah.
know, you want them
Yeah.
to come away and say,
Yeah.
this is possible. You can wander around for
Hmm.
2 hours
Hmm.
without any thoughts and
Yeah.
just be in joy, and
Yeah. Yeah.
this
And
is how you do it.
yeah, I mean, the one reason I focus on that when I'm walking by myself is I just want all of my spirit to be so connected with nature and like
Mm,
just in the body of observations and moments and emotions, without having to name it or categorize it or catch it in my notebook or my journal or something
mm,
like that. So that when I am teaching people or sitting at my desk and writing, I can just open up that flow and it's there
yeah,
in
yeah.
me. And I don't know where it comes from. I mean, I'll sit down, or when I'm on a walk, I'll start talking on a walk, and I have no idea where the things I'm talking about come from. They're just like I'm opening up this well and things come out. And it can go for 2 hours just like riffing on the moment. And I don't know where it comes from. Like, I'm not like shaping it. It's just like I'm standing back with everyone else, like watching this flow of stuff come out. And I'm like amazed as everyone else. And I think
Yeah.
that comes out of endless hours of just walking in nature and being completely open to everything, observing everything, following animals, watching animals,
Mm.
smelling flowers. And then when I talk, I'm speaking from that space. Yeah. So,
Yeah, yeah. I am so behind this. So when I teach nature journaling, I often talk about how we can bring this idea of curiosity to the world. And when we are curious about things, we realize that everything around us is interesting.
mhm,
Everything around us can be a source of wonder.
mhm,
And then when we when we realize that we live in this world that is infinitely fascinating, you can so easily drop into this place of joy, because how can you be surrounded by these wonders without feeling joy? And
mhm.
and it sounds like that's what you bring to your nature walks, is like,
Yeah.
look at where we are. Look at
Mhm.
what we get to experience in this moment.
Yeah.
How can we not just wander around with our eyes wide open, with our hearts wide open? Because it's
Yeah.
it's incredible.
Well, I'm deeply envious of people that are have made nature journaling a practice. I have huge admiration for people that are like they're able to like be with their journals and sketching and coloring and taking notes and like just creating a narrative across the pages and image and questions and colors. And I don't have that, and I wish I did. I'm so envious of it because it's like being an apprentice to nature and like just bringing your creative spirit to just learning as nature teaches you, and then you have a record of it later, which
Mm,
is so
mm,
incredible, and I don't have those things. And so I follow the Nature Journal Club on Facebook, and I look at the things that people create, which are so beautiful and so many good questions and so many maps of their imagination going across pages that I just absolutely think it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And I wish I could do that. I don't. So I'm just a lonely writer and write a few things and teach. I teach people about the natural world, but I really admire nature journalers.
Being an apprentice to nature is a glorious way of saying that. I love that so much. Yeah, let's sit.
That's it.
Let's
Yeah.
sit
Yeah.
and listen.
Yeah.
Let's sit and learn
Hmm.
from
Hmm.
what's around us.
Hmm.
It's very special. I mean, you are doing that. You are doing
Yeah.
that in your own way.
In my own way. Yeah. Hmm.
I'm interested in, so you obviously have this deep connection and passion for nature, and also inside you is a desire and a need to share that. And you mentioned it before, but I'd love to talk a bit more about it. Um, you're creating videos for other people to experience
Hmm.
nature,
Hmm.
and I'm wondering about that. Your experience creating videos and why you're drawn to this medium as a way of sharing nature with others.
Uh, well, that's a good question. Part of it is just a lifelong frustration at not being an artist. And I've always, like, I'm not a musician. I can't draw or sketch worth a darn. And I've never learned how to do any of these things. And I've always wanted to be creative and create creative things. But I've been locked in this analytical mind my whole life from earliest age of being a scientist and training to be a scientist. And then trying to be a writer, but writing nonfiction for serious publications and stuff. Um, so I've always been looking for a creative outlet, and the video came about because I've spent my life leading nature walks and taking people on out in nature or giving classes and workshops and stuff. And then COVID came along, and there was no longer a way to interact with people in person. And
Yeah.
so that's when I realized that maybe, and there's a whole new social media world, and I was like kind of curious about that. And so I started putting this together. And like, why don't I use videos to capture what I would talk about on a nature walk since I can't do it with COVID? And that way, it's always there on the internet, be there forever, and it can reach people all over the world, much bigger audience. So why don't I just try to lead a nature walk with the camera and talk to the camera as if it was my audience? So that's where it grew out of. And it's I like it. It's fun to do. Um, but my creative side wants to do something different with video, and that's what I'm really trying to push towards, which is like when my entire life, when I listen to beautiful music, whatever song is really capturing my heart and my spirit, I'm seeing incredible nature in my
Mm.
mind's eye. I'm like
Mm.
listening to this beautiful song. I like might start
Oh, wow.
crying or like getting my heart's like doing going warm, and I'm like, and I'm seeing nature, I'm seeing beautiful places, I'm seeing landscapes. And so the idea of combining beautiful nature footage with beautiful music is, to me, that's art. So that's the first time in my
Mm,
life I've
mm.
ever had an art form that I feel like I could put beautiful music together with videos. I'm not writing the music, I use other people's music. um, but to come up with beautiful nature footage and then have the beautiful music and let people's emotions and their own thoughts arise, that's more interesting to me than standing in front of a camera and explaining the parts of a flower or something like that, where I'm shaping the entire dialogue and that's all people are thinking about and hearing. It's cool. I mean, that's what I've done my life, is teaching people, but that's not the kind of video I want to create. So anyway, I'm just exploring with this new world and I love it. So thank you for asking that. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm so interested in the flow of that because you also create beautiful nature photography
Hmm.
and this nature video. You obviously have to see very deeply and very, you obviously have to you have to, what am I saying?
Hmm.
You have
Yeah,
to find what you're looking at. You have to
you do.
know where to look.
Hmm.
You're taking a moment with nature. You're
Yeah.
obviously bringing a whole lot of patience
Hmm.
to the
Yeah.
process to be in the right place at the right time. I'm wondering about do you get in the flow when you're creating photos and videos?
Well, I'll focus on video because that's the main thing I'm trying to do. And like
Mm.
on Instagram, I do a reel every day. Um,
Mhm.
uh, and I did photos for a while. I was doing photos only so I had content for Instagram,
Hmm.
to just give people something every day, a little snapshot of nature, something that would be inspiring from me being in wild, wonderful places. Um, but it's more satisfying to me to make a little reel for Instagram every day
Hmm.
than it is to put a photograph up. So I focus on that. And you're right. When you're out in nature, you have 360-degree everything going on around you. And you have a little lens that's going to point at something and a moment. What is that going to be? And how can you,
Yeah.
as a naturalist, how can you direct people's eye towards something or a process that's going to be beautiful and of interest? So that's what comes in. Like I'm trying to use my naturalist eye to direct
Yeah.
people's attention to something, some subset of this bigger view that's going to be really
Yes.
engaging, especially on Instagram where it's a little vertical strip out of the even what the camera gets. So you got to
That's
really
right.
be thinking about what is that little sliver that you're going to give people that's like a magic window. And so
Yeah.
yeah, that's a beautiful process. And then I'm trying to create reels that just like feel like they're taken out of a dream. Like you watch a little 30, 60 second reel and you just want to stay in that world forever because it's so beautiful and the music's beautiful. That for me is like the little light bulbs go off in my brain if I can do that, like, oh my God, this reel today is so beautiful. I want to watch it forever. And that works. Like that puts people in nature wherever they are in the world. They might be commuting or on the subway or sitting in some apartment somewhere, and they get to see something that just takes them into nature and makes their heart come alive. And if I can do that for people, that's being a naturalist too. It's a different way of being a naturalist, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I love that you can bring a little piece of your part of the world to someone else and
Hmm.
make areas accessible that
Yeah.
wouldn't be accessible. We don't have
Right.
to fly across the world to
Right.
experience these things.
Yeah. Yeah. You might film something in your yard, but with the right context, it becomes the whole world because it's so beautiful and so
Yeah.
meaningful. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love the overlap between the idea of language and the malleability, the evolution of language, and what you've been talking about stories and sharing and making a nature experience together. So you talked about when on your nature walks that you don't know what's going to come through you. You just start the process and you're talking and you're getting excited with
Hmm.
others around you, and that evolution and that bringing attention in a certain area, those two things remind me of each other, the evolution of language and the evolution of the experience that you give to people on your nature walks.
Hmm. Hmm.
I like that.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I don't know what to say about that.
No, I just think it's lovely. I think that it's alive. What you do is really alive,
Hmm.
um, and
Yeah.
evolving,
Yeah.
and so is nature, and it's very related to that. You talked before about how you're still sort of coming to understand and solidify why playing with words um,
Hmm.
feels like being in nature.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
and to me, that's partly it, that it's alive, that it's
Oh,
play, that it's
yeah.
evolving, that it's
Oh, that's great.
that it. Hmm.
Yeah. I mean, if you can share with other people, no matter what you're doing, just the joy of the moment of being fully alive and curious and excited by what you're experiencing and learning and wondering about, no matter what you're doing. But we're doing it in nature. Um,
Yeah.
that's the best gift you could ever give people around you, even if it's not something they learn or do, to just participate in that moment for a few moments, like together. We all get to be childlike
Yeah.
wanderers together. That joy is so palpable and everyone just gets into it and they're giggling and laughing, and you can just see people's eyes come alive. And to me, that's like, if we could all do that as a group and share that with each other, that's the best we can do. And if I could do that in nature, that's my calling and my gift. But you could do it with
Mm.
music, you could do it with any kind of storytelling or anything you do. You could do it in the workplace, but just
Yeah.
bringing that joy together, that's just wonderful. So yeah.
Yeah. David, this has been such a great conversation, and I'm
Yeah,
really
thank
happy
you.
that we had the chance to talk today. Thank you so much.
Me too. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with David. I loved how he knew exactly what he wanted to do with his life right from the age of 5 and pursued that. Even when it took some twists and turns, he always returned to nature and found ways to make that his life's path. This conversation just got me thinking in so many different directions about the nature of language and how we can play with words to find deeper meaning and connection. Inventing words isn't something that I've thought much about before, but I'm super excited to play with words and explore this process and see what comes from it. David talked about the importance of naming things, not necessarily with their scientific name, but with words that mean something to us as a way to connect. He also spoke about how naming things can sometimes take him away from the moment of total immersion in nature. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts and experiences on this. Does knowing the name of something in nature help you connect? Or is it a kind of endpoint that stops you from going further? Like, once you know the name, you move on. It's such an interesting thing to think about. In some ways, having a name for a plant you encounter in the forest, for example, it's like learning the name of someone you meet in life. The first thing we do when we meet a new person is to ask their name. It's similar with things in nature, I think, when we know their name, and that could be their scientific name, but it could also be a common name or a name that's local to your area, or just a name that you've created yourself, like David suggests. It's like getting to know that species on a deeper level. But I also know exactly what David was getting at when he talked about being in nature without words, without names, without labels or anything except the being. If you'd like to share your own experiences with this topic or anything we talked about in this conversation, please feel free to write a comment under the podcast episode on the Journaling with Nature website. You can find the link to this in the show notes. Also, while you're rambling through the show notes of this episode, please do visit David's website, social media, and also his YouTube channel. If you need a little nature inspiration or a moment to reset, he has some incredible videos that will leave you feeling connected and in tune with the world again. Thank you so much for listening. See you next week.